February 24th, 2022. In less than 6 hours, Finnair lost €3 billion in market value. Russian airspace, through which 90% of its most profitable routes passed, had just closed forever. The company that built an empire flying over Siberia was suddenly stuck at the edge of Europe with a fleet of aircraft worth $300 million each designed for a route that had ceased to exist. But here's what's terrifying. They weren't just the airline most affected by the conflict, they became the most vulnerable in modern history. While other companies could readjust routes, Finnair had bet everything, every plane, every crew member, every cent of investment on a single geographic corridor. And that corridor had just turned to smoke. But it didn't stop there. Flying to Tokyo now meant 4 extra hours, 4 hours of burning fuel, 4 hours that transformed Europe's most profitable route into a financial black hole. Analysts gave Finnair 18 months before bankruptcy. The Finnish government prepared an emergency bailout plan. What nobody realized was that Finnair was about to do something no airline had ever attempted: completely redesign its business model in less than 12 months. And against all odds, in 2023, something considered impossible happened. Aviate has reached 20,000 subscribers passionate about aviation. Our sincere thanks for your support. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Helsinki, 60 degrees north, a frozen capital on the edge of Europe that, by pure geometry, became the most valuable place in the world for commercial aviation. Not by chance, but by mathematics. Take a globe, put one finger on Helsinki, another on Tokyo. The shortest line between these 2 points doesn't cross Europe nor the Middle East. It cuts straight through Siberia. And for 30 years, this was Finnair's most profitable secret. While European airlines took 13 hours to reach Japan, detouring south, Finnair did it in 9. 4 hours advantage over any competitor. This isn't just convenience, it's a weapon of mass destruction in the aviation market. 4 fewer hours meant billions in savings over a decade. And they doubled down on the bet. In 2015, Finnair began receiving its fleet of Airbus A350s, each costing $317 million. Aircraft designed to fly long-haul routes with maximum efficiency. Carbon fiber fuselage, equipped with Rolls-Royce Trent XWB engines, among the most efficient ever made for intercontinental flights. State-of-the-art navigation systems and lower cabin pressurization, plus dozens of other qualities. By 2019, they had 19 of these aircraft, each calibrated for a route that crossed exactly 7,200 kilometers of Russian territory. In short, Finnair was the bridge between 2 continents based on a single geopolitical pillar: Russian stability. Almost all major European airlines used Russian airspace and paid overflight fees. Lufthansa, Air France, British Airways, all depended on these corridors to shorten flights to Asia. The difference is that for many of them, it was an operational advantage. For Finnair, it was the central pillar of their business model. In 2021, 40% of all Finnair revenue came from Asian routes, and of those routes, 90% crossed Russian territory. They had transformed Helsinki into Europe's most efficient hub for Asia-Europe connections. Passengers from London, Paris, Berlin, all traded direct flights for connections via Helsinki because it was simply faster. The strategy was perfect, until it wasn't. Dawn of February 24, 2022. Russian tanks crossed the Ukrainian border. At 6:47 a.m. local time, the European Union closes its airspace to all Russian aircraft. At 8:22 a.m., Vladimir Putin responds. Russian airspace is closed to all European airlines. In 94 minutes, 11 million square kilometers of sky became an invisible wall. For Finnair, it was like waking up to discover that the bridge you used to go to work every day had simply disappeared.
Worse, you live on an island, and that was the only bridge. Let's do the math. Helsinki-Tokyo via the Siberian route, 9 hours 20 minutes. Distance, 7,800 kilometers. Now, without Russia, 13 hours 40 minutes. Distance, 10,500 kilometers. You have to go around, over the North Pole, or go down through Turkey, cross the Middle East, go up through Pakistan, circle around China. 4 hours 20 minutes extra. But it's not just time. An Airbus A350 burns approximately 2,500 liters of fuel per hour. 4 extra hours equals 10,000 additional liters per flight. With aviation kerosene prices in 2022 inflated by the conflict itself, that represents about $15,000 extra per flight. And Finnair operated 42 weekly flights to Asia. Because here's what most people don't understand about long-haul aviation. It's not just pressing a button and flying farther. International regulations require that for flights over 12 hours, you need additional crew, extra pilots, extra flight attendants, because the main crew can't fly more than 13 hours without rest. Suddenly, each flight to Tokyo needed 4 pilots instead of 2. All the economics of a lean operation optimized over decades simply ended. And then comes the final blow: geography. When the Siberian corridor existed, Helsinki was the center of the map, the perfect point between Europe and Asia. But now, Helsinki was at the edge, a dead end on the northern edge of a continent. If you're a passenger in Paris wanting to go to Tokyo, why on earth would you take a connection via Helsinki that now takes 13 hours when you can take a direct flight, or via Frankfurt that takes 13 hours too? The competitive advantage evaporated, and with it, Finnair's reason to exist. In March 2022, the stock price fell 73%. Funds began selling. Finnish banks triggered protection clauses in loans. CEO Topi Manner gave an interview to Reuters where he said he was evaluating all options. Everyone expected collapse, but suddenly, April 2022, Finnair headquarters in Vantaa on the outskirts of Helsinki, an emergency meeting that would last 14 hours. At the table, the CEO, CFO, heads of operations and strategy, and a world map projected on the wall. The question was simple: if we can't fly east, where do we fly? The obvious answer would be give up on Asia, focus on Europe, become a regional airline. It was the safe path, predictable, but very risky. Changing the entire philosophy of a company with billions of dollars in aircraft on the tarmac for regional flights wouldn't be sustainable in the short term. So they did something radical. They turned their backs on Asia and looked west, United States. But not just any American route. They needed cities that had real demand for Helsinki but were poorly served by direct connections: Dallas, Seattle, Denver.
In June 2022, Finnair announced 5 new routes to the US. Investment, 0. But wait, there was still the problem. What to do with the Asian flights that still existed? Because completely canceling Asia would be admitting defeat, and it would mean giving back slots, landing and takeoff times at airports like Narita and Changi, slots that took 20 years to acquire. The solution was anything but conventional. Fly the most difficult route in commercial aviation: North Pole. In August 2022, Flight AY73 Helsinki-Tokyo became Finnair's first regular polar route, crossing at 40,000 feet over the Canadian Arctic, passing 300 kilometers from the North Pole before descending through Alaska toward Japan. 13 hours, still 4 hours more than the Siberian route. But it was possible. Only that still didn't explain the 2023 profit. Now here's where it gets absolutely brilliant. While everyone was focused on routes and destinations, Finnair did something that no public analysis captured at the time. They transformed their aircraft into rentable assets. It's called wet lease. You rent not just the plane, but the entire crew. Pilots, flight attendants, maintenance, everything. It's like Uber, but with $300 million aircraft. In September 2022, Finnair closed a contract with Qantas, the Australian airline. Qantas was desperate. It had exploding post-pandemic demand, but lacked aircraft, and Finnair could meet that demand. The deal? 3 Finnair Airbus A330s would operate Qantas routes between Bangkok and Sydney, with Finnish pilots, Qantas uniforms, for 18 months. Guaranteed revenue, €87 million. No market risk, no worries about flight occupancy. And that was just the beginning. In November, Lufthansa rented 2 aircraft. In January 2023, Japan Airlines closed a wet lease for domestic Japanese flights with Finnish crews. Suddenly, the aircraft that would be a deadly burden became money-making machines. Finnish pilots were flying between Sydney and Bangkok, Tokyo and Osaka, Frankfurt and South America. Finnair had become a kind of aircraft rental company. And here's the smart move. This solved the pilot problem. Because when you have 400 pilots trained for A350 and A330 on Asian routes, and those routes disappear, you have 2 choices: fire or reallocate. By the end of 2023, the company had 8 aircraft on wet lease, with 200-plus pilots and 600 flight attendants operating for other airlines. This yielded $340 million, almost 20% of revenue. Then came the shock. Net profit of $188 million in 2023, the largest in Finnair's history. How? Finnair's recovery wasn't chance, it was one of the largest and most audacious strategic changes in 21st century aviation. With a forced shift to exploring new global routes and wet lease contracts, greatly reducing the company's risk, in addition to cutting European routes that no longer made sense and were unprofitable, they concentrated on a single manufacturer, Airbus. This reduced complexity, maintenance, and training costs. Cost per seat kilometer fell about 23%. Of course, strategic partnerships such as cooperation with Qatar Airways using alternative hubs to maintain connections between Europe and Asia needed to be established. There was also state support. In 2022, the Finnish government injected $400 million through stock purchases, reinforcing cash at a critical moment. The European Union approved the operation as it was equity participation, not a direct subsidy. The result was a turnaround based on efficiency, not growth. In 2023, revenue was still below pre-crisis levels, but costs fell about 31%, allowing a net profit of approximately $200 million. The final numbers for 2025 have not yet been officially closed. So far, Finnair has only released partial results. In the January to September 2025 report, the company recorded a positive comparable operating result of €50.7 million, with revenue growth in the quarter, even facing strikes and increased costs. For the full year, the company itself projected revenue between $3.3 and $3.4 billion, and a comparable operating results between $100 and $200 million. But the final net profit or loss for 2025 will only be confirmed when the annual report is published. The company learned that depending on a single geographic corridor, no matter how profitable, is a huge risk. The Siberian route was fast and cheap, but it wasn't secure in the long term. Now Finnair has routes to the US, wet lease contracts, partnerships in the Middle East, and a smaller but more efficient fleet. It has become a more diversified company and less vulnerable to geopolitical shocks.